Hey, welcome back to Ribbon Candy Hooking. I'm Deanna. I'm going to do another video today on hooking with yarn, and I did a basic one before that got a lot of views and a lot of comments, and people seem to really like it. So I'm going to do one that's a little bit even more basic and even more beginner by demonstrating the way that some of these yarns hook, different weights and gauges of yarn hook. And it is so hot that I'm sure, glowing. But we're going to do this whether it kills us or not, which it might, because it's that hot in Connecticut this summer. It's only June too. So let's look at our supplies so far, things that I'm going to use. And first of all, the question that comes up the most often is about hooks. I only ever use 2 hooks, okay? I'm not including a punch needle. If I'm hooking, I only ever use 2. And I'm not recommending the 2 that I use. I'm saying for me, I can't justify having a mug full of $78 hooks because I have found a big one and a little one that I like, and that was through trial and error. And in Connecticut here, we have the Whispering Hill rug hooking shop in Woodstock, Connecticut, and I know Donna, the woman who runs it there, allows people to try hooks, and that is a great thing. And it could be that your rug hooking store, it probably is if they give classes, will let you try hooks, because it really depends on how it feels to you. Don't buy the most expensive one because you think it's like quilting, and the more expensive your supplies are, the better your end product will be. It's not necessarily so. If you don't have a good, this sounds so transcendental, but if you don't have a good relationship with the hook, your hand, doing this motion over and over, you're not going to enjoy hooking, and it's going to put you right off. And particularly with yarn, you need to have a good hook. So you need to have the right hook, okay? You don't need to have an expensive hook. So I work with these 2. They're very different, right? This is the pen style hook. This one is a more expensive one. I got this one like used at a yard sale or something. I know I was super lucky with that. But it's got a teeny tiny little tip on it. If you can see that, it's out of focus. Maybe if I'm not in focus. Still out of focus, but it's got, there we go, a teeny tiny little tip. And this is good for really small yarn, like sock yarn and fingering yarn weight, lace yarn weight. I'll show you that. And this is my go-to hook for always, every day. It's flat. And, it's got a fairly big head. It's good for primitive, but it's also good for number 4 and number 5. I do everything with this hook except tiny bits of yarn. And the reason I like this style of hook, especially for yarn hooking, is because the flatness helps me. I feel like when you put it into, I usually work on monk's cloth, although sometimes linen, sometimes rug warp, different backings, sometimes burlap, not so much burlap now, especially with yarn because I don't feel it's tight enough. But with this hook, because it's flat and wide, it goes down into a hole, for example, in monk's cloth, and it opens it wide open. It stretches it because it's wide, and it gives you enough time to pull the yarn up and come back out, and then closes right back up, like something from science fiction, right? Just eats up the yarn and closes itself back up tight and keeps it in there really tight. Doesn't mean that you need a flat hook. It means try different hooks and see which ones you like the best. So I've got my 2 hooks here ready to go. I'm going to work for now on this frame, which is just a little, very small beginner frame, like 10 by 10 maybe. But this frame has this toothy thing on it, right? This gripper. These are called gripper strips. Nobody seems to call them carpet strips anymore. They used to be called carpet strips. It's like many, many, many needles sticking out per square inch, and that's how they're measured. But most rug hooking frames have these gripper strips, and gripper strips are great. I don't always hook with yarn on a gripper strip frame because I'm gonna repeat this later because I think it's important. Because with yarn, it's often the kind that I hook with a lot of sock yarn and thin yarn. It's small, thin, cylindrical, and it's more likely to pull out than a giant, wide, flat wool strip. So I have to say, I have never had my yarn, even sock yarn, get pulled out on a gripper frame, but I live in fear that it will. So when I'm working on a piece that is a lot of, I know I've shown this one before, it was the one that was still on the frame because I haven't gone back to it, all sock yarn, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of, now it's on the gripper, right? Watch it pull the whole thing out. Nope, it didn't. When I'm working on something that is a lot of really thin yarn, I would rather work on my quilting hoop. It's called a quilting hoop or an embroidery hoop. It's a lap hoop. this doesn't have combs. It just goes by pressure, right? And if it makes any kind of little dent into your loops, the loops bounce right back up. It's never a thing. It won't last. It might seem like you're crushing it by putting finished work under the loop. It's not crushing it. It'll bounce right back. But I feel a little bit better when I'm hooking something with very thin yarn to use a quilting lap hoop. I don't use a regular loop because when you're hooking, unlike punching, one hand is always going to be under pulling and the other's going to be not pulling. The one hand's going to be feeding and this one's going to be pulling on top. And I want this space between the surface of what I'm working on and my lap. I don't want, unless you're happy with leaning a hoop up against a table, which I know a lot of people are and it works. For me, if I were punch needling, which is what the next video will be about, I would constantly be pressing down. And so this loop wouldn't have to be a lap hoop. It could just be a hoop pressed up against the kitchen table, and I would just be putting pressure down on it, and the edge of the table would be taking that pressure. With hooking, you're pulling up, not pushing down. So here I am pulling up, up, up. It's going to keep bouncing off the kitchen table or whatever you have it propped against. For me, again, some people who are rug hookers, not punchers, use hoops always and are way better than me and have always done it that way. So again, it's a preference thing. But if you are using a hoop and you are doing rug hooking, whether it's with yarn or strips, and you are struggling, that might be the nature of the struggle. And it's a bummer that frames are as expensive as they are. It's a super bummer, but that's a different conversation. If you are doing a lot with the really thin sock yarns, fingering yarns, lace yarns, that kind of weight, I would be doing it more on this kind of a hoop, a quilt hoop or embroidery hoop. You can find them on the secondhand sites on Facebook. You can find them probably at Joann's. For right now, I'm going to use this. It's a regular little frame, and I'm just going to take my monk's cloth and just get it on here, tight as a drum, right? We know that, tight as a drum. Get it stuck on there. There's no permanent consequences to stretching and abusing your backing fabric, no matter what your backing fabric is. There's no consequences to making it tight as a drum. It wants to do this. It wants to perform like this. So now let's look at. I'm going to start with this hook just to show, and I'm going to start with the smaller gauge, smaller weight yarns. I'm going to start with this sock yarn. Maybe I'll get this Angry Birds cup out of the picture, right? This is how classy I live. So this is a sock weight yarn, and it's very thin, right? It's to make socks. But the thing is with sock weight yarn, when you go to a nice knitting store, it's so tempting. It's like decadent. It's like every skein is gorgeous. They come in a hank and you have to spin them yourself or have them spin them for you into this kind of a ball so you can actually use it. There are services that spin also, like on Etsy. You can hire somebody to spin a bunch of your hanks so you end up with these cakes, and then they're easier to use. It's really the only way you can use them, unless you have somebody willing to do this for hours, like the Pioneer days, and roll the ball that way, which also can be fun. Depends on who that person is. So this is sock yarn, and sock yarn is super, super thin. And do I seriously not have a pair of, yeah, I have a pair of scissors. I'm just going to cut some and show you. Sock yarn is super thin. If I were hooking with sock yarn, it would take a long time to get anything going. So I'm going to use my regular hook. I'm just going to come down and I'm going to pull up a single strand. Let's just do it at the end. I'm under here feeding it with my hand, and I'm going to pull up a single strand, right? And then I'm going to pull up one next to it. And the thing with this is that it's super thin. It's working. It's super thin. Depending on what you're going to do, this is going to take a long time, right? This is teensy tiny times. You can do this, you know, ad nauseum. There's nothing wrong with this, but it's going to take a lot of time. I'm struggling with this hook too, and that's a good thing, because I'm going to show you how with this weight yarn, as much as I love my beloved hook, using a slightly smaller hook with sock yarn can help. The little head wants to grip better. Now it's pulling up those loops without shredding them every time. It's just going more like butter. And that's not because this is an expensive hook. It's because it's a tiny hook and it has a little tiny crook in the hook. So this is working really well, but this is going to take me a long time. So what I usually do with sock yarn is I double it up, or quadruple it up. I'm going to double it up and I'm going to show you the difference. The first one's going to be a single again. Now, the next ones, my fingers are super sweaty, which isn't helping. I'm getting a double loop each time now. And if you can see, I know you're a little ways away, but if you can see, I'll try to zoom maybe. Boy, I'm sweaty. I'm going into just about every hole too because this yarn is so thin. If you can see, it's like more like a little caterpillar at this point. It's coming up much thicker. It's coming up doubly thick. They're still standing pretty well. I would fluff them up later the way I wanted them, but with doubling it up, you get a much thicker line. You get a twice as thick line. Now, with a sock yarn like this, I'm using this particular one that I thought looked like mellow sort of Indian corn, and I love it, and I want to do something with a fall picture for it. So I'm looking forward to the color changes. That's another reason to use sock yarn. It's so much fun to await the color changes and to see it, you know, change as you go. Creates so much excitement. I guess it depends on what your definition of excitement is, but for me, it creates huge excitement. Now I've doubled my double and I've quadrupled up the sock yarn. And I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to start the row next to it. And now it's going to be 4 times obviously thicker than if I were just doing a single ply. I've got this quadrupled. It's not hard to pull up. I'm just being careful. Oops. So it's 4 times thicker. And a couple of the things that you notice, obviously it's coming out faster, quicker. Another thing to notice is that with a 4-ply across, it's making this a directional piece, right? Whether I want it to or not, there are 4 tiny loops side by side. If I am twisting it poorly underneath and it comes out all crazy like that one did, it's not going to look as good. I'm going to keep going anyway. Oh, I'm running out of my thing. Now I'm down to a double. But my point is, when you double it or quadruple it, it comes out thicker, it comes out faster, but you get more loops per pull. Instead of getting 1 loop, you're getting 4. And now you've created something directional. Be conscious, if that matters to you, that you seem to be going in a direction now. You got 4 little loops and their faces are all pointed this way or whatever you're doing it. But you're getting 4 little loops side by side. Which is usually a good thing if you're filling in space. You know what, I'm just going to put that back in so we can leave that there as an example. Let me just hook real quick. I got just doubled now. I have it doubled underneath my hand. And I'm just going to leave that there so we can look at some different weights. This is about the smallest, thinnest, narrowest gauge weight you would want to work with, I think, unless you're a wizard and you want to really just go for the lace or the lightweight lace or anything like that. This comes out great. This will work great. It's just you have to find out whether you want to do the doubles, the quadruples, or how you want to work it. So sock yarn. Now, this is something different, right? If you have done embroidery or a crewel or anything like that, you know what tapestry wool is. It's usually Persian wool. It's very nice. It's not super expensive. It already comes in a ply or in a twist. So it's already been twisted a couple times. These aren't like single ply fibers or yarn pieces. This one looks like it's a triple or a quadruple already, but that is the thickness of the yarn. So this is also fair. This is thicker than sock yarn, but there's no reason why you shouldn't. I'm just going to pull one out of the bunch because they usually come in bunches. You know, if you find these kits at a thrift store, like these Persian wool kits for doing needlepoint, or if sometimes they say ermine tapestry, that's a brand, something like that. Sometimes you don't like the picture on the kit because it's too corny or dated or whatever, but there's a ton of wool in there. You can pull that out and use that for hooking. That is prime material. The colors, it's 100% wool. The colors, which it doesn't have to be, but it means that it's really high quality, durable, and the colors are powerful and bright and vivid. So I'm going to just hook a little bit. I've never actually hooked with this before. Let's see what happens. The Persian wool is definitely more coarse than most of the sock type yarn you would ever find, right? Because who would sell you sock yarn that was super coarse? assuming you were going to make socks out of it, right? Probably not going to happen. I have to say, this Persian wool is pretty amazing. This is like an epiphany type thing. It's so coarse. It's really working well with the hook. It gives a lot of resistance coming through the little holes of the monk's cloth. And it does not want to move at all. That is really good. Let's see that. The second one, the longer one, is this flesh colored Persian wool. It's standing up like little loops again. This is great. This is actually great. I'm going to use all my Persian wool now. I was going to put it all at Goodwill, but I'm going to use it. It stands up real straight and rigid, and it's got, because it's really stiff, coarse yarn wool, it has a lot of structure. So pluses and minuses, right? If I'm comparing these two real similar weights of yarn for hooking, the sock yarn is going to come in color changing varieties like the Indian corn color. Anything that you can think of, the sock yarn is already in the store waiting for you and is super tempting. It is a little bit more silky and slippery, a little bit harder to hook, depending on the brand and the yarn, quality aside, just the properties of the yarn itself. Can be harder to hook, can want to fray, hard to know, but I still use sock yarn all the time. But now I will also be reaching for Persian wool. Plus with Persian wool, super coarse, super stiff, holds its form, very easy to pull through, like it was born to be hooked rather than sewn into a tapestry type thing. I would say minus, it's always going to come in solid colors unless you enjoy dyeing. I've done some videos on dyeing, very easy. You could do ombre dyeing, you could do casserole dyeing, spot dyeing, you could hand paint Persian wool. But Persian wool, as far as I've ever seen, or at least sold easily commercially, Joann's, that kind of thing, will be solid, because they usually assign a number to the wool in a kit, and it's got to be solid. But you could dye it, or you could just get every color that's ever been made in the history of textiles, and then you'd be all set with that too. So that worked out really well. I love the sock yarn because of the variety. I love the Persian wool because of its the ease of using it. Now this one is an acrylic wool blend, and you know, I've said before, acrylic isn't my favorite because it has a look or a sort of gleam, a luster to it that looks cheap to me sometimes. I've spoiled myself with knitting and using more expensive fabrics. But I have to say, I've come across some books recently, and I'll do videos on that too, that show traditional artists using, oh God, I hope that's sweat, not a bug crawling up my leg, using acrylic wool to hook, only acrylic yarn, and it really is stunning and beautiful. So it's a preference thing like everything. This is a wool and acrylic blend. And this is more of like a DK, bordering on worsted, more of a DK weight. Oh, I dropped one of the ones I wanted to show you. But this is like you would see like Red Heart, something like that. This is, I think, Plymouth, but Red Heart wool at Joann's or Michael's or whatever craft store, Walmart, anything, is going to be about this weight. So this is real common. This is going to be, because it's a blend, it's going to be easy to hook again. And that's a big plus. Course, with wool of this weight, you can dye it, but I wouldn't try dyeing wool that is an acrylic wool blend, because you need different dyes with natural fibers like wool and silk and cotton than you do with synthetic fibers like acrylic and polyester. It's completely different dye. And you might think, oh, it'll work if I just put a little in. I only want a pastel color, so who cares? It's probably not going to work, or it's not going to work well. It's not going to have staying power. It's not going to hold. It might bleed. It's probably not going to work. So you're better off not using a blend if you plan to dye something that you get at Joann's or Michael's or one of those, or get one that's already the color that you want. But I can't advise over dyeing blended acrylic or synthetic and natural wools, because for me it's never gone well. So this is hooking really well too. I lost where I was. How's that even possible? Oh, I'm on the wrong one. I was on the peach one again. So yeah, this is real easy to pull through. It's not as easy as the Persian wool. I'm still using my little hook. My big hook I'm sure would work fine too. Let's switch the big hook just so he doesn't feel neglected and left out. Yeah, that works fine too. It's actually still, this little one is still working better at this weight with this tiny little head on it. Yeah, this works good too. This is also great. Let me cut underneath. Again, nice height. This is like a DK weight, and this is a, I should have done them in darker colors. How would it ding dong? But it's got a lot of structure. It's not as stiff and as coarse. It doesn't hold its own like the Persian wool does. But, you know, a DK weight wool, whether it's a blend or it's 100% wool or 100% cotton or 100% anything, the thickness of it is good. You're going to be in a good situation to outline or fill colors in. It's not super, super, super thin. It's good enough to get your picture going. So you could basically use that width or that weight, a DK weight, for just about anything. Now this is more this is a DK heading toward a worsted too, but this is a more silky blend. This has definitely got some wool content, but this is a real high end one. This might be all wool actually. It's got a high luster. I have a feeling it's just spun really well and often, and it's made it shiny and silky, and it's just gorgeous. One of my friends got me this one to knit with. I thought I'd hook with it instead. So let's see, this is a similar weight to the white DK. That's a wool blend from like an average anything store. And this is one that's more from like Webb's or a fancy knitting store. Yeah, this pulls through just fine too. It's the same kind of weight. It's absolutely a breeze. I'm still pulling through every little square. I'm not skipping any squares like I would if I were hooking with wool, because it's so small. If you're going to skip, you're going to get a lot of gaps or holidays in the background. So this is working great for me. It's making a nice even line, real easy to use. And with this weight, I would still think about doubling up. So let me double this one up and see. Now doubling up means, again, I'm going to have two loops side by side, and it's going to be a wide single loop in the hole. It's a double, but I mean, it becomes a single because they're side by side in the same hole, and it becomes wide. Just having some technical problems there. My fingers are so sweaty. I need to be hosed down like a dog in the backyard, which is going to be my next move. The kids would be happy to do that, I bet. So you can see how nice it is when it starts doing its games with color changing. It's really, really fun to see that color change happening. And I clipped this one. Let me show you this. Yeah, that's so nice when it starts to change its colors. Hope you can see that. It's like all pearly. It's just a, you know, it's a nice, more expensive yarn. That kind of yarn is probably something like 18 to 22 or 25 a roll, but it'll have something like 200 to 300 yards of yarn on it, which goes a long way. But you can see it's doubled up, and when you double it up side by side, nice and tight, it's going to fill an area really well. It does a color changing on its own. I could see this being part of a sunset or part of an underwater thing with the teals and the golds and the mauve, and it looks so pearly. I mean, that's the part of the property of this particular yarn. And when you're choosing your yarn based on your design and what you want it to look like, you think about the luster of it and what you intend it to look like. It's so good to have a variety of different yarns, different weights, different fiber contents, different sheens in your piece, because it creates interest. That's what's happening right now with all of the Dion Fitzpatrick's rugs and all the Canadian artists doing similar types of rugs. They're using so many different fibers and weights, really nubby, thick yarns with really silky, thin ones and feathery ones, all kinds of novelty yarns, all in one piece. And it is absolutely not traditional hooking, but it is fantastic. So you might not get the blue ribbon in a traditional rug hooking show, but your piece will be outrageously good and interesting to look at. And when you're using fancy yarns that are different and have these magical properties unto themselves, they do half of the work for you, and your piece will be unique and original and great, just like traditional rug hooking is. But this is something different. It's an alternative. So that was that. Now let's move on to definitely worsted / bulky. A little bit thicker, right? This is one that I dyed, sort of a cotton candy thing, and it's a bit thicker. I would call this bulky, I guess. So, oh, I got my hook stuck, and I was itching my head with my hook. That's not a good thing. That's dangerous. I'm switching now to my thicker one, because my little one is just, as you can see, just no Darwin Award here for getting this. it's gonna separate it. It's too thin, it's too small. When you're choosing a hook, don't choose a hook that's so small it grabs 1 out of 10 of the pieces of yarn in your strand. So automatic jump to this one, my bigger one. And I know if my bigger one can handle size 8 cut wool, then it can pull a piece of yarn through a hole. So now this one I'm going to probably be doing, yeah, I am doing just about every other hole of the monk's cloth because it's much bigger. And this is going to give you a quicker fill. You can still get a lot of detail with this kind of weight. I'm kind of alternating. Sometimes I do every one and then I do every other one. So one together, one apart, one together, one apart. Feeling it as I go, filling it out. So yeah, this works great too. Again, real stiff, just like the Persian wool. Lots of body. Get a real good feel for the color with a nice thick piece like that. One of the other bonuses of having hooking with yarn that's as thick as this, bulky, worsted or bulky. Worsted's a lot thinner. It's more like the one before. Bulky or even super bulky is it's going to go so fast. And if you're doing a background of, you've got a mermaid going on your back cloth and you want tons of sea and seaweed or coral or whatever, you're going to hook that background so fast because this is so thick. And it's really easy. I have to say, I'm going to say it, it's easier hooking this kind of yarn than it is hooking wool strips, for me. It really is. My hand is just feeding it easier. It doesn't have a right way or a wrong way, right? It's not a strip, so it's not flat. So you're not accidentally pulling it backwards and twisting it underneath or on top. It's round. So all I'm doing, whatever I feed it to my hook, whatever my hook takes is going to be right. Because there's only one way to deal with this wool, is just pulling it through. There's no mysteries. That works real well. Very pliable. You can fool with them later. You always want your loops with wool strips, and same with yarn. You always want them to be about as tall as they are wide, like a little tiny square. That's how it looks the best. It has to look the best to you, but that's how it typically looks the best. So let's move on to super bulky. Now this is super bulky, right? I dyed this one too. This is nice underwater colors or sky colors, more sky, I guess. But this is super bulky. This is much thicker. I would use this weight or this weight to bind the edge of a rug too. I wouldn't use anything thinner because I think it would take too long. There'd be too many little gaps to deal with. But I would use bulky or super bulky to bind the edge of a rug. You get really, really a lot of coverage. But it's going to be okay for hooking too. And of course, I'm going to take a larger hook to fool with this. And when you get this bulky, it's harder to pull through. Plus, it's going to go fast once you get yourself going. Another con, it's a huge statement when you have something this thick and big showing up. Now, again, if you are doing like a mixed media looking piece, it's going to be really neat to have some big nubbins like this on top. Big, huge little knots of colorful wool on top. I wouldn't want to do a whole, monk's cloth is really tight, so this is really testing it. This would work on burlap great. It would pull through a lot easier, probably linen too. It works fine on monk's cloth, but I wouldn't want to do the whole thing with monk's cloth because I feel like my wrist would get really tired. I haven't attempted it. I would do a good amount of space with something super bulky, but it's a little bit hard to pull through. It's thicker, but it does look good, and it looks really good. I haven't got perfect knots there, but you get a feel for what the material is and what it can do. Of course, you can always go in and adjust your knots later, but bulky works. Bulky works fine. Just make sure you have a hook that's a larger headed hook, because otherwise you're going to drive yourself crazy losing pieces as you go. So that bulky is great too. Now let's go into really crazy territory here. I don't even know how this is going to turn out because I haven't done this with monk's cloth, but this is the Sari yarn, right? S-A-R-I. And this comes all spun, like taken from Sari silks and spun all up. There's a lot of this on Etsy, Ravelry. If you look at the Ravelry.com, it's a knitting page or knitting crochet. And there's a tab, they just redid their site that's trade/sell, and lots of deals on there. And they have a lot of Sari yarn too. They have a lot of all yarn, but I found particularly a lot on there. So let's see, looking at the sort of inconsistent nature of Sari yarn, it could be a nightmare. It could, and it probably will, try to rip on every other loop. Or you will figure out what your threshold for pain and aggravation is. Mine is not super high. That's probably because I have little kids right now and I don't have a lot of extra. But with this kind of material, the Sari, you get to see how it was really thick at first and then it got thin, 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 and now it's thick again. It's going to create a lot of interest. It's going to be gorgeous. But you don't want to use Sari yarn for hooking, I don't think, the entire piece. Maybe the background, maybe the water, maybe a theatrical curtain on a proscenium arch. It's very inconsistent. Now my hand has got what feels like a cigarette butt under there, and there's no way it's going to go through. So with that, I would have to cut underneath. Okay, so this is what was coming up next. So that can happen with Sari yarn. At that point, I would maybe just cut a little bit off and then keep going, but you can see probably not much good is going to happen with this. I would just go to this. So if you are hooking with Sari yarn, you are going to get beautiful, brilliant colors, like impossible to get in any other way. You get threads within threads. It's like a little Russian nesting doll of a strand of yarn. It's gorgeous. Lots of little pieces, lots to look at. It's doing a lot of the work for you in terms of what it's giving off. It looks rough, but it looks dramatic. It's beautiful, but it's harder to hook, and it will break, or it will give you enough resistance every few inches that you will be cutting it underneath. You'll probably have a little bit of loss. A skein of Sari, a hank, which is about, I think about 75 to 100 yards on average, is usually about $15. So it's not outrageously expensive. I don't think you would typically use more than a hank doing a piece, unless you were really going for it. Depending on your design, you might want to use more of it. But if you are using these thicker materials like Sari yarn, not Sari silk, but Sari yarn, or bulky, I would think about switching to burlap. I know people don't like burlap because it will rot in 100 years, but I would just check in with myself in 100 years and decide if I really, really cared that much. Because if you're not using it as a rug, it probably won't get wet anyway. It's up to you. I've always liked to use burlap, and the pioneers of rug hooking used burlap because they obviously didn't have as many choices, but we still have a lot of their beautiful work. But you could try burlap if you want to do a lot with these thicker fibers, or try linen, like a looser linen. Either of those things will work, but monk's cloth is going to really hold your yarn tight. That's the plus. Oh, I think I have to go and pause. I'll be right back. The monk's cloth is really going to hold each strand, for me, the best. That's what I found. The best is the monk's cloth when it's all yarn. But if you want these really thick ones, think about using a different backing. So this is probably crazy, but I thought for the last pop, let's actually look at the Sari silk. So this is the Sari yarn, right? It's different. This is yarn already spun up for you from garments, and this is silk pieces. I haven't undone this hank yet, and I obviously haven't rolled it into a ball, but let's see if we can find an end. All right. Oh, look, there's an end. So let me get it under here. I'll just cut a piece off. And let's see how we do with this. So this is probably going to be even better than Sari yarn because it's flat pieces. So yeah, they're wider, but they're paper thin, and they're probably going to go through like a dream. I'm anticipating some issues with twisting and directional things going on, and I'm guessing if you are a big OCD person like I can be, this might not be the thing, but let's see how it goes. So Sari silk feels like, if you're into textiles, like silk dupioni. It looks like I'm going to need to hook like I did with the bulky, either every hole or every two together, skip one, two together, skip one, because it doesn't fill a ton. It comes up as a little flat loop, but that loop is paper thin. It's a really different shape than anything we've seen so far. Yeah, it's twisting as I go, but you know what? It doesn't matter. It still looks great. It's wanting to do its own thing, but it's coming up, you know, paper thin, these cute little shapes, very flat, very structured, and it's real easy to hook. So that's interesting too. Let's look at that one. That's not bad. You know, this Sari, I think I'm blanking out on what it's called. Yarn, I guess. No, not the yarn. This is the yarn because it's already twisted. They might both be called Sari yarn, but you'll have to look when you're buying it because obviously this looks really different. This is already spun than this. This is almost like bias that's been taped together millions of times, but it has a lot of threads and stuff hanging off of it. So, you know, you would be dealing with this as you go. But look what it gives you. It's very satiny, you know, like a real dupioni look, really structured loops. They stand up real well. They look like ribbon candy, just like you want them to. Really nice. So here are some options. I mean, this is just about anything that you would be doing with a hook with yarn. And they're all beautiful. And if you can imagine, you know, using yarn on your design, color changing, unexpected colors coming and going, coming in and out, adding interest. Absolutely, in my opinion, not harder than hooking with wool. But you know, they have different properties, they do different things, they perform differently. Every kind of yarn you might buy would. So you need to think about what you want to do with it. One of the things I can say about yarn, one of the other things I can say about yarn in its favor is that unlike primitive, you know, number 8 wide cut traditional rug hooking strips, you don't worry as much about directional hooking as you do with yarn. You don't worry about it as much as you do with wool strips because it comes out in little bubbles, little rounded bubbles on top. The dupioni comes out more like a wool strip, right? Because it's wider and it is a strip. I know I've seen silk sari material that is thinner than this, and of course you could cut it and then you'd have an even smaller loop. This will be the sari, the last sari one I did will become directional because the loops are very clear and defined. Even from this distance, you can see these are really clear and defined. The super bulky too, clear and defined. And the further down you go in the weight of the yarn, the less defined it is. And then really it's not directional, you're just filling in spaces, right? This is just filling in spaces. Dot, 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 dot. So these are some of the different weights that you might want to look at. Again, I have this on monk's cloth. I think that pretty much covers it, except to say with the Sari yarn, there are so many colors, but not as many colors as there are available even on eBay, Etsy, Ravelry, anywhere. There's not as many Sari colors, not as many Sari sellers, therefore colors, as there are with any other kind of yarn. So if you're dying to do projects with this Sari yarn, you know, get the white and dye it, because this is 100% silk. So you can dye it with any kind of silk dye, the Pro Chem or the Cushing dyes, or probably even the RIT dyes that are meant for natural fibers. But what a fun project that would be. And anyway, I hope that this helped. It's nice to look at hooking with yarn. I love hooking with wool strips, but all the crazy colors of yarn that you get, you know, there's not as many, sad to say, rug hooking stores around as there are knitting stores. There's knitting stores all over the place. And when you go in there and you see all of those insane skeins, you know, you want them. And if you're not a knitter or you don't enjoy knitting as much as hooking, or it's a new hobby for you, it's just nice to know there's another kind of store you can go to get supplies, justify the spending of all those new hanks of yarn. But I mean, it's well justified. This stuff works great in rug hooking. We'll do some videos coming up about punch needle, which I also really like, and talk about the difference between doing punch needle with yarn and doing rug hooking with yarn. And it'll give you a good sort of compare and contrast and ideas about what might be better for you. But in the meantime, I hope this video was helpful. I hope you enjoy. Take care of yourselves and be careful this summer 2020. And if you can, leave a comment or a like so that I know that you're out there. It's hard to get feedback on my channel, and I record as many videos as I can with kids clawing on the back of the door while I'm trying to do it. But leave a comment or a like so I know that you're there, and leave me feedback if you want to see something different. I'm happy to record a video just for you if you have a question about something I might know the answer to, or I can at least direct you to somebody who would know the answer, who's been doing this longer than me. Have a great day. Bye. And one more crazy addendum to an already long video. I just thought of 2 more fibers that you might want to use when hooking with your yarn. So let's just add those 2 right now. One of them is roving, right? So people do needle felting with roving. It's basically, it comes in different forms, but this is like little strips of roving. So you see this again on Etsy and those kinds of craft supply places. This is roving. So it's been combed and it's been spun into these big wide pieces, but obviously not finished into any kind of ply. It's not been twisted, or there's been nothing done to it beyond just combing it, in this case coloring it. But when we're talking about using different materials to make different textures and variety in a piece with wool, this is a good choice, roving. So let's see, I'm going to literally, just to show you how I'm going to work with it, I'm just literally going to cut it. So if you had a larger piece, you could cut it too. You could spin it if you wanted to work it that way. I'm going to let's just put it through this way. So just flat the way it is. I'm going to just hook a couple pieces, a couple loops with it, and let's see what it looks like. Now you want a really bigger hook for this. My big primitive hook is okay. The bigger the better with something like this, because there's lots of pieces to grab. But man, does that come out nice. Look at that. I only cut a little bit. It's only going to do 3 loops, but check that out. I mean, that's wool. That's it. That's about as pure as you can get. Beautiful. Well, actually, except for the next thing I'm about to hook. But I mean, it looks like, you know, roving comes in every color. It comes in multi. This is a multi, right? It's like a little package I got of, I was doing needle felting for a while. It didn't really strike me, and I gave it up. And I just found this little bit. It came in this brown and white. Somebody's dyed it. It was like $1.50. So it's not that much. And you get a piece like this or any color. You can really add texture. God, how good would that be for like a horse or an animal or even a tree, you know, depending on your color. So that comes out real well. Now here is the last thing I'm going to show. I've been buying these curls. They're called Wensleydale curls or sheep curls. You can see they're actual curls. It's bags of colored curls directly from a sheep and dyed. So this is very raw and pure. Again, Wensleydale. So Wensleydale, I think is going to get you there on eBay. And they've still got a little bit of like vegetable matter and stuff in them. You just pull it out. It's nothing gross. So part of it looks like roving and part of it looks like curls. So let me see if I can find one that looks more like it. Here's a little curl. Let's nab this little guy and see how he wants to hook. Oh, it's part of a larger color changing piece. Let's see what happens. So I'm pulling out this piece. This is all attached, and you can see there's some of the natural color here. This may look gross, and if it does, I'm sorry, but it's just sheep curls, and they're obviously adorable, so this is all right. But with this, I would figure what piece I wanted to use. I'm going to go for the blue, and let's see how it hooks. I haven't done this before. I got it with the intention of doing it, and now I'm doing it here for the first time on video. But let's see. I don't want the end to pull through just yet. I want us to see the best of it. So you know what I think is going to happen here? As great as these are, it being curled, I don't think is going to help us much at all with hooking. So, okay, now we know. So I invested in quite a few curls. When I'm hooking with the curls, as you can see, they look grand, right? I mean, it's beautiful. Luster, they stand up well. There's a lot of body. They're very easy to pull through because they're so soft, unlike some of these thicker wools. They're so soft, color changing makes it beautiful. But the material already being curled and you pulling it through into loops cancels itself out. So it's a curl plus a curl equals not a curl. So I'm getting basically the same effect with the curls, the sheep curls, as I'm getting with plain old roving. So I guess it depends if you were doing so. I mean, obviously I'm not a textile artist who deals exclusively with sheep curls, although I'm sure that they exist. I imagine if you were doing something different with them, like pulling them through and leaving the ends out here and there, you might get a different effect just giving the end. Or if you were to pull it through a lot, then it kind of turns into a big roving mess. It will, I'm going to pull this through real loosely. And what I'm getting, again, is not much different than what I got before. It is giving a good background, right? It's not creating really clear loops. It's a little bit hard to pull, not hard to pull through, but it's hard to control a little bit. But as you can see, it's not impossible to imagine using it in a background. It's happening fast. It's coming through fast and furious. There's a lot of variation as it comes through. Give some good light. So I could see this. I mean, if I continued pulling through these curls, I'm not going to get something that looks curly on the surface of my backing fabric, but I am going to get something that looks really high luster, unusual. Each loop is going to be different. I've left a little end up in two places. It looks interesting. It's not bad. You could see that being a sky. I'm changing my opinion quickly. It's going to be for this material, the sheep's curls, the Wensleydale curls. This is going to be for someone who really wants a lot of variety in their piece and is at peace and happy and excited about the prospect of not being able to control it fully. So there we go. So there was two more for the books. I'm going to leave it at that. That's a lot to think about. It's a lot to look at. If you can think of another sort of textile that is going to be fun to hook with, let me know, or you do a video and we can post that too. It's fun to experiment with different things that make sense and give different effects. So anyway, that's it. That really is it for now. See you soon.